Right, today I want to delve into the last bit of Mark Gurman's massive report on Apple's Silicon Macs, and that's about the Mac Pro Mini and the iMac Pro. We also have some information about Apple's best SoC yet, the M1Z or M2X. I'm not too sure on the naming, but one thing is for sure, this chip is gonna be a beast. But before we delve into that, let's get some bad news out of the way first. Development for the larger iMac has been paused for the last few months to focus on the release of the 24-inch iMac. Now yes, I know some of you might be thinking, how exactly is this an issue? Because the 24-inch iMac is out now, so Apple can clearly focus back on the larger iMac and release it by WWDC. Well, Mark Gurman mentioning this clearly means it's a pretty significant piece of info, and it leads me to believe the larger iMac has sadly been pushed back. I mean, for example, in the exact same report, he mentions pretty clearly that the M1X MacBook Pros would be launching this summer, but he says nothing about that for the iMac Pro, and so it's pretty clear to me that the iMac Pro won't be releasing till the end of the year. Now yes, I know this might be disappointing news for some, but this does make sense, because the 24-inch iMac needs some breathing space since it just got released, and for it to be overshadowed by a bigger, more powerful iMac within a few weeks doesn't really make any sense. Imagine the confusion when somebody specs out a recently announced M1 iMac for $2,500 and then in a few weeks, Apple releases a $1,799 iMac Pro with a bigger screen, a possible smaller chin, and most importantly, a much more powerful M1X SoC. Now you may wonder where I got the $1,799 figure from, and that's the price of today's 27-inch iMac, and obviously this iMac Pro might have the Pro branding, but it's going to be replacing the bigger iMac, because personally I think the regular iMac name is going to be used for the smaller iMac from now on, and then the bigger iMac has the Pro branding. That makes the most sense to me. Anyways, since the 24-inch iMac is exactly the same price as the 4K 21.5-inch iMac, it leads me to believe that Apple can offset the higher cost of a redesign with the savings they make with Apple Silicon, and so Apple can bring us a newer design, M1X, all those goodies at the same price as the 27-inch iMac. But essentially, coming back to my main point, from a marketing perspective, it makes more sense to space out the iMac releases, and so a release at the end of the year does seem more plausible. Now, as for the specs and features, we don't know a lot. In fact, Mark Gurman mentions nothing about that in this report, but of course we can speculate, and essentially we should expect a design that's very similar to the new iMac, but of course with a smaller chin, black bezels, and on the whole it should look way more professional. We could also expect a mini LED panel on the iMac Pro, much like the new iPad Pro, and basically this should give you higher brightness, better contrast ratios, better colors, and overall this should be a massive improvement over LCD. In terms of the SoC powering the iMac Pro, it should be the M1X, so a 10-core CPU with 8 power cores and 2 efficiency cores, and a choice of 16 or 32 cores for the GPU. Anyways, let's now move on to the Mac Pro Mini. So Mark Gurman offers us information on what to expect with this Mac Pro with Apple Silicon, and well, it's gonna be absolutely spectacular stuff. So Mark Gurman expects a 20 to 40 core CPU. That's gonna be 16 to 32 power cores. For comparison, the M1 has 4. This is 8 times that. I can't even begin to fathom how much performance that's gonna be. And the news keeps on getting better because the GPU should be up to 128 cores. That's 32 times the GPU on the M1. So again, that's gonna blow away the competition, and I can't wait to see that. Now, by the way, in case you're wondering, the maxed out Mac Pro has a 28 core CPU, so a 40 core CPU is gonna be absolutely ludicrous, and yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the benchmarks of this M2X or M1Z SoC. Now, some of you might wonder whether we'll see this SoC with the iMac Pro, and while there is a possibility it could be an optional upgrade, depending on how expensive this Mac Pro Mini is. though obviously do note, the iMac Pro has a much more restricted thermal envelope compared to the Mac Pro Mini, so I don't expect the 40-core CPU and the 128-core GPU to come over to the iMac Pro. Maybe the base Mac Pro Mini chip, that would be the optional upgrade available on the iMac Pro. Anyways, let's move back to the Mac Pro Mini because I want to delve into the specs and features. So basically, John Prosser told us a few months ago that the Mac Pro Mini should essentially be a few Mac Minis stacked together. In fact, it should very much resemble the G4 Cube back in the day, and so it's going to be way smaller than the current Mac Pro, and that does mean that maybe we could lose the upgradability. Now this will be the major advantage the 2021 Intel Mac Pro has, because yes, we're seeing a new Intel-based Mac Pro at the end of the year. And yes, I know some of you might be thinking, why is Apple releasing another Mac Pro this year with Intel? I thought we were over with Intel, I thought they broke up. Well, I think they're releasing another Intel Mac Pro because some professionals rely on hardware that only works with x86 devices, and that's going to be the case for the time being because, especially in those professional environments, they rarely move on to a new platform immediately because obviously they rely on this hardware for their work, and Apple Silicon is still in its early stage, and so obviously professionals don't want to risk moving to the platform before it's fully ready and optimized, and so till then, they're gonna stick with what works, even if the performance is of course worse. But anyways, coming back to the Mac Pro Mini, I am super excited to see this, and basically Apple flexing how much power they can put in a computer, because obviously with the M1, M1X, and whatever we see with the iMac Pro, there will be limitations because obviously some are laptops, some have screens, some have a limited power supply, some of them have batteries, but the Mac Pro Mini should basically be Apple flexing their prowess in terms of making silicon. And again, I can't wait to see the benchmarks and how this pretty much destroys the competition. Now, Mark Gurman does say the Mac Pro Mini should be releasing in early 2022. And yes, I know Mark Gurman is incredibly reliable, but I don't agree with this. I think that there is a chance we could see this Mac Pro Mini by the end of this year. In fact, I think we could see 3 mini events, much like we saw last year, where we see September focusing on the iPhone, Apple Watch, and a few iPads, October focusing on the new MacBook Air and the base MacBook Pro, and then November focusing on the iMac Pro and this Mac Pro Mini. Especially since Apple does traditionally release their most expensive professional computers at the end of the year, like the iMac Pro and the Mac Pro, it makes sense that the iMac Pro and the Mac Pro Mini follow suit. But anyways, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments below. Anyways, thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumors. Check out the video in the icon above about some details regarding the M2 MacBooks. And on that note, I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya, peeps.